Today's episode has been brought to you by OfferingTree. Did you sign up to be a yoga teacher so you could send more emails and Zoom links and update your website more often? I doubt it. Most yoga teachers I know didn't sign up for that reason. They decided to share yoga because of how it impacted their life. That is why I love to tell yoga teachers about OfferingTree. If you are struggling with a website or you need to create one, or if any part of your yoga business happens online, like payments, Zoom links, emails, or videos that you want to share, make sure to check out OfferingTree. It's the platform that I love and use. It's also a company that I trust, and we have a discount code for you. OfferingTree.com/Shannon. Hello and welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast. Maybe you are a brand new listener, and if so, hi, it's great to have you here. And maybe you are a returning listener, and it means so much to me that you are hanging out and listening again. I'm your host, Shannon Crow. I use she, her pronouns. This podcast is being recorded on Anishinaabeg, Odawa, and Mississauga land, also known as the Bruce Peninsula in Ontario, Canada. Before we dive right in today, and because it goes along so well with today's topic, I would like to acknowledge that yoga was taken, and this was not information that was being shared when I first started to learn about yoga. I didn't hear that in any of the classes I was signing up for or the yoga teacher trainings that I was taking. The people and the cultures that cared for yoga for such a long time were not cared for or honored in this process either. And so I have been looking at how can I, as a white yoga teacher from the West, take care of this practice that has really taken care of me throughout my life. And I'm so glad that you are here with me on this journey, especially if you have been listening to the podcast in the last few weeks. If you've listened all the way through June 2022, if you're listening in real time, or if you're finding us sometime in the future and you're finding these episodes where we really dig into the big questions of how we can care for yoga. The last 3 episodes go along with this really well, so go back and have a listen to those if you haven't already. So as I have said all along, this is a learning journey. And speaking of learning, I'm also a mom of 3, a yoga teacher, podcaster, and founder of Pelvic Health Professionals. And in all of these places, I do a ton of learning, unlearning, and making mistakes. And this podcast was created for you, so that each and every week you are connected to the most up-to-date information and inspiration that will support you as you grow your unique yoga business. Because I know some of the days are really tough as an entrepreneur and as someone who wants to share yoga, but also wants to take care of it. So as I said, we are continuing this entire month of digging into challenging conversations. So we talked with Susanna Barkataki in episode 276 about how we could care for yoga's roots and how we can recenter South Asian yoga teachers. And then last week, we talked about land acknowledgements with Emmy Chahal and Jessica Barudin. And in today's episode, we have Emmy Chahal back with us to talk about religion and cultural respect and what this means for us as yoga teachers. So if you listened last week, then you met Emmy and I did an introduction. But if you missed that and you're just tuning in for today's episode, here's a quick recap. So Emmy Chahal is a trauma-informed yoga teacher, bodyworker, energy healer, and workshop facilitator. And she works at the crossroads of business, social justice, and spirituality. She has experience of more than 19 years of steady yoga and meditation and over 10 years of teaching. Emmy integrates her educational background in cultural studies and gender and women's studies to offer tailored workshops for workplaces around wellness topics, cultural education for yoga teachers and practitioners, and she covers topics like cultural awareness, ancestral healing, and uncolonizing yoga. On top of this, Emmy also does intuitive healing sessions, and she offers mentorship for yoga teachers and semi-private classes. In today's episode, we are going to tackle some big questions like, how are yoga and religion connected? Why do some people, depending on their religion and their beliefs, feel like yoga is quote unquote evil? And what does spiritual bypassing look like, and why is it harmful? So yeah, we get into a lot of things. We are not shying away in these episodes. Emmy has so much to share on how colonization has shaped our understanding of religion and why it's important to learn about other faiths to avoid causing harm and violence. We also talk about how yoga can strengthen your faith practice and how to be respectful of other cultures while we partake. We also talk about how yoga can strengthen your own faith practice and how to be respectful of other cultures while we partake. Also, while learning about and connecting to our own culture and the importance of that. We actually also did this episode live back in July of 2021, so I'll make sure to link in the show notes to the live video in case you want to see some of the comments and questions that came up from our listeners back then. It's here for you so that you can listen on the go and you don't have to watch the video, but the video is there in case you want to see faces while you listen as well. And if, as you listen to any of this, you have thoughts or questions or ideas that you want to share, I'd love to hear from you. We've been having some great discussions over in the Connected Yoga Teacher Facebook group. And there's also a place to leave a text comment. That's on our show notes page over at theconnectedyogateacher.com/278 for today's episode. And on our website, if you go to our homepage, you can look for the button that will allow you to leave me a voicemail. So that's another way to get in touch with me. I love voicemails. I love to hear from listeners. And thank you to those who reach out and let me know what your thoughts are on the episodes. It really means a lot. Like today, when Amanda, shout out to Amanda, who's way up in Edmonton, Alberta, reached out to me and said, Shannon, I just have to leave you this voice message partway through listening. Or to Jessica, who's in the US somewhere. Actually, Jessica, maybe you're traveling this month now. But Jessica reaches out sometimes and is like, here are my thoughts on this part of the episode. Thank you. It's so fun to hear from listeners. All right, let's dive in and hear from Emmy all about yoga, religion, and cultural respect. Hey, welcome, Emmy. Welcome to the live Connected Yoga Teacher podcast.
Hi, Shannon. It's so nice to be here with you.
Emmy, I am so glad that we get to dive in and speak today. I wanted to first ask you, what is the work that you do and who do you do it for?
Well, in the last year or so, my work has been a lot around diversity and wellness consulting, specifically, with an academic background in cultural studies. It finally became available and open for me to talk about ancestral issues in the past year after the Black Lives Matter movement. So I do a lot of workplace wellness consulting. Before that, I did a lot of corporate yoga, and I also am an intuitive healer. So that was a gift passed down to me from my grandmother. I do intuitive energy massage. So I do a form of bodywork, energy healing, and intuitive coaching. And then finally, I do a lot of community workshops and retreats. And now I am building my own retreat center, a sustainable center in Sechelt in British Columbia.
Oh my goodness, I'm so excited about this. We started talking before we hit go live here, and I'm just excited how you build that. And I feel like I love BC, so whenever you get that up and going, we'll have to come over and have a tour and have a visit in real life. So we are going to chat today about yoga and religion. Before we dive in, I just want to acknowledge that this is a really big topic. So we'll cover as much as we can. And I really want to get your thoughts on this. And I just want to start off by saying, I jumped out of my first 200-hour yoga teacher training really feeling like yoga and religion are very separate. So if there's any way that I ask a question today and you're like, actually, Shannon, maybe, have you thought about this? I would appreciate if you, kind of enlighten me at the same time as our listeners. So
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. And I am North Indian, so all of my ancestors are from North India, and it's really important for me to say, I'm not speaking on behalf of all Indians. I'm not speaking on behalf of anybody. Just my own experience as someone who was raised with yoga, someone who's family lineage passed yoga down onto me, and someone who did yoga growing up in a temple space. So I'm really grateful for you acknowledging that. And I think this is really beautiful how the world is shifting for us all to acknowledge social location and our backgrounds and also our blind spots. And I totally will admit that I am just doing my best as a human being. And I'm not a theologian. I do have a background in power and privilege, but, not, not a religious expert by any means, but was raised with it.
okay, so tell us, what are your thoughts on how yoga and religion, how do they intersect? How are they different? How are they similar? What are your thoughts on this, overall thoughts?
Yeah, it's a huge question. And, when I go back to classical yoga 5,000 years ago, archaeological evidence, I really believe that in some ways yoga predates religion, and it also is influenced and influences all of the major philosophical schools of spirituality in India. So Buddhism, for me, Sikhism, Hinduism, all of these isms is actually a colonial framework to understand something much more complex. And to me, yoga is a mystical path. It's a path of divine self-realization. And unfortunately, after 400 years of colonial occupation of what is now known as India, because that was a term that only came about in the 20th century, there's so much pluralism in this subcontinent that I'm from. Where I'm from, particularly in the Punjab, is one of the most religiously diverse places. And when I go back to my motherland and the homeland, I see people of all religions going to other places of worship. And it's very normal, as a Sikh person to go to a Hindu place of worship or to go to an Islamic even. Not all the time are they open, but there's a lot of mixing and a lot of sharing of knowledge. And in the north of India, in the Himalayas, when I think back to my ancestors, I know that they were very concerned with direct experience of the divine and that transcendent quality of getting to know who they were in the universe and that exploration of consciousness. So when the British came to India, they sort of imposed their religious ideas of Christianity onto a culture and a place that really does not conform to that little box of religion. The Vedas are super complex, philosophical, deep, systems of really self-knowledge and getting to know our connection to our spirit and our soul. And it's an extremely advanced understanding that, unfortunately, colonialism sort of reduced down to a religion. So even, the term Sikhism, Sikhism is a 500-year-old religion, but that term, I'm finding more and more of my community call it Sikhi, which is the means to learn, to seek. And I come from a oneness tradition. My family is Sikh, and I grew up doing yoga in a Sikh temple with people of all backgrounds, because that's a huge tenet of the faith that I was raised in, that all people are one, and that, we are all connected by this one spirit. And these yoga classes were open to everybody. I did them from the age of 11 to 18. These yoga classes were really an example of interfaith pluralism, you could say, because we were all coming from different backgrounds, different religious frameworks, but we all did yoga together, and yoga became a way of connecting to a collective consciousness, but also connecting to our own personal spirituality. So it's a huge question, but I feel like that's a solid answer, in terms of beginning, is that yoga is influenced and influences all of the major religions coming out of India, but even to call them a religion is sort of reducing them down. Does that make sense?
It so does. And I've had other friends explain this to me, like it's not the same around the world as it is, like when friends are talking to me saying, it's not the same, Shannon, as it is for you in Canada or in North America. Religion in different areas or belief systems in different areas. Exactly what you said. I love this, that it wouldn't be unheard of to feel like this is kind of the box I fit in with my beliefs, and I go and check out other beliefs and hang out with other groups of people as well. Which we don't see that a lot here in the West, in my experience.
No, and I think that attitude of learning about different faiths and learning about, the interfaith movement, for me, that is real faith, when you can question it, when you can really compare and look at all the different things from, a fairly moderate perspective and say, wow, those people have beliefs and there are similarities here. Maybe all of these pathways are leading to the same source. Maybe there's some similarities that make us feel more human. And even though we come from different places on the earth and different backgrounds, we can have respect for people of different beliefs. And unfortunately, coming out of India, that didn't exist when the British occupied India. Yoga was banned. It was seen as deviant. Even within India, in some ways, mystics were seen as, they were heavily persecuted. Sikhs were heavily persecuted. They were a minority group within India. So, even with the farmers' protests, that's really centered in my ancestral homeland with, our faith being deeply connected to agriculture. And the first teacher of Sikhism, Guru Nanak, he walked for 30 years all the way to Mecca, all around India and the Middle East, preaching this message of basically peace and love, like a lot of prophets do, and had this Sufi mystic who would play music with him. And Guru Nanak was really just saying that we're all equal. We're all human. There's one spirit that connects all of us. And this is only 500 years ago, the same time as Shakespeare, but very few people are aware of Sikhism in North America. And there's a lot of misunderstanding and there's a lot of violence, unfortunately, when people think that Sikhs are terrorists or, they're somehow there's an overlap of this prejudice and this stereotype that's just not accurate.
Yeah, I think that's a huge takeaway here. If we could understand someone's quote unquote religion, I'm using that term because it's like I don't know what other word to say, or like belief system. When we don't understand someone's culture or beliefs, then that is what can happen. So I'm curious to know. Let's say you bumped into me when I was a brand new yoga teacher. And I want to say well into teaching yoga. I don't want to say right when I came out of YTT. And a common thing that I think I said to people, especially in the area that I live in, where once I was told I wasn't allowed to teach yoga in a church because it was against that church's religion, I was defending yoga in a way saying yoga is not religion. What would you say to me if then you're like, Shannon, let's have a discussion about this?
Yeah, that's a huge discussion. The fact of Christianity and yoga and this fear that exists. I've seen a lot of Christian people say, yoga threatens my religion or it's against my religion. And I'm like, wait, do you know what yoga is? Like, have you actually researched this? Like, have you taken a moment to see that it's an embodiment practice? It's a mind, body, spirit practice, and that it can help you in your faith practice. Like, it's something that connects you to you. And, having taught in large corporations and tech companies, I really struggled with reducing yoga down sometimes to make it accessible or, scientifically understandable by these right-brained people. But what I would go back to is that yoga is about union. It's about finding that connection between your mind, body, and heart, and really connecting to yourself. And if you're scared to lie down, because apparently it's the shavasana where the demons can get you or whatever, which I just think is hilarious. No offense, but if you can't lie down for 5 minutes and be scared, then that's something to inquire about. that's a fear-based ideology that unfortunately a lot of religions with this moral control, and before we had, laws and systems that created order in our society, religions were using fear to control people. And I think to this day, all we have to do is look at the horrific crimes of the church and residential schools on this stolen land. All we have to do is think about how none of those priests or nuns or whatever were ever tried or taken to court for horrific crimes against humanity. And so much violence and war has been done in the name of God because of people's basically ego interpretations of religion. And that stems from fear and ignorance, which leads, in my opinion, to colonialism and to those really harmful political strife that humans have basically had since as far back as I can see. So what the answer is for me is love, is understanding, is really connecting to our hearts and seeing our humanity and seeing that, wow, this is a culture and religion that's really interesting. And what people find in India when they have these spiritual experiences in India is that India is a very open, loving place. We're very hospitable people. In my region of India, we have the world's largest soup kitchen as part of the Sikh faith. It feeds 80,000 to 100,000 people a day in the Golden Temple. And that is a selfless service. Everyone can eat there. Everyone can go to any Sikh temple and eat for a full meal. That's all run by donations. So to think about the generosity of India, and I think this is what has led to the appropriation and the sort of stealing, which seems to be a common theme in North America. I just think that we have to come to it from a place of, wow, we as humans have been through a lot and we need to go forward differently. And now I'm getting into some bigger, colonialism, but I thought that's important to say.
It sure is. And I appreciate that you brought up what's happening right now. Just to anyone who's outside of Canada, Emmy and I are both in Canada. And I would encourage you, if you're curious about it, just to read up on what I want to say what I'm learning as a white person here in Canada about the residential schools, things that I didn't know and things that I wasn't taught in history class. And I want to say that the Indigenous people here very much did know and were living, but weren't being listened to. So check that out for sure. I think that's important. And people might be like, why is this coming into the discussion now? It's coming into the discussion because of colonialism and how it's the same thing. Now, when you're talking about Sikhism, right away, I'm brought back to my 200 hour. So my first 200 hour was Kundalini yoga teacher training. My teacher's teacher was Sikh, was Yogi Bhajan. I'm not going to get into the whole conversation around Kundalini yoga, but I want to say that there were a lot of elements of Sikhism that were brought into my yoga teacher training, even though I couldn't recognize them. And at the same time, there was this thread of yoga is not a religion, to give comfort to the people who were coming to the training or coming to class and worried, like you said, that fear-based thing.
Yes, it was catered for a specific audience, and this is something that is really going back to the 1930s and Krishnamacharya, is that to make yoga palatable to white people, it was reduced down to physicality, to asana, when it's really just such a complex 8-limb system, as I'm sure all these yoga teachers know. And, going back to the issue of residential schools and how does that relate to this topic, we had a genocide here in Canada, a full-on genocide that, as you said, it was not taught in schools, and so sad. And ongoing repercussions of that we're all benefiting from that system of genocide. And that's what I see my role here as a settler, but also as a formerly colonized person, is to build bridges between people, because most people don't know that a very different type of colonialism, resource extraction colonialism, led to a genocide in the north of India, in like 1949, basically when partition happened. Millions of people were killed. There was a lot of rape, a lot of gender-based violence as a result of an arbitrary border drawn by the British through the heart of the province that I'm from the north of India. And so I was encouraged to do this cultural awareness work actually by my Coast Salish sisters and brothers and my friends who are Indigenous, who I was very committed to learning about Indigenous allyship. And as a formerly colonized person, as someone who is a migrant who is living with intergenerational trauma, I can really empathize and I'm super committed to learning about what happened on this land. So I encourage everyone here to learn about whose land you're on, learn about the history of it, and then see that, actually we're all complicit. If we're living here, we're part of that system, and we have a responsibility to start to shift it and change it. And unfortunately, in the yoga world, I think there's a lot of spiritual bypassing. There's a lot of like, oh, this makes me uncomfortable to know that there was a genocide in India and now I'm stealing this and my livelihood depends on it. Like there's a lot of discomfort there. And what I would say is the answer is looking at your own ancestors and connecting to your own ancestry and looking back and seeing what your ancestors went through. And then I think everyone on the planet will realize that we all live with intergenerational trauma. We all live with it in different ways and in different sides. Like to be the oppressor is different than being the oppressed, or to be, the person who is living with huge amounts of, like, the Indigenous people on this land have faced unthinkable horror, children being taken out of their families and indoctrinated through the religion, through the school, forced to speak English, killed, not allowed to practice their culture. It was very different in India because it was about resource extraction. But in India, the same thing happened to my people, where we were forced to speak English, in, again, different country, different context, different way. But our traditional languages were taken away from us. Yoga was banned for 400 years, or basically the Victorian era repression resulted in a lot of sexual repression, a lot of gender-based issues that people don't realize are not inherent to Indian women or India. It's really colonialism that exacerbated the inequalities between men and women. This idea of internalized oppression that, white people know more, that's something I struggle with as a yoga teacher is, why are there so few Indian women in the yoga world? Like, it's only in the last year that we started to see voices like Jaisal and Tejal and, the Yoga Zed podcast gaining some momentum, but really that's due to the labor of the Black Lives Matter movement. So there's a lot of overlapping connection here between culture and religion. And unfortunately, what I've seen in my own faith background, a very egalitarian faith where it says explicitly in the text that men and women are equal, that all people are equal, and that it's a very forward-thinking text. It takes aspects of many religions in Sikhism. I've seen how the culture permeates the religion and how, the oppression of women can overlap because of these societal patterns that I'm actively breaking.
Thank you so much for that. Oh my gosh, that's such good information. And I want to pull out a couple of things. One, I heard you talk on another podcast to take a look at your ancestors, and that really inspired me. It made me think for days about this. I have different ancestors from all over Europe mostly, and I'll just give one example. One example is one part of my family, like my great grandfather's family, came from Ireland, hence the name Shannon. That's how I get my Irish name. And just thinking the fact that my family were immigrants here and not welcome in all places, and just then having that empathy for other people who are immigrating, coming to Canada, and obviously I don't know what it feels like, but connecting with that was a line in my own family. I don't know if that's what you meant in that podcast, but that's how it landed with me, and I continue to look at it.
Yeah, really interesting. I think I highly encourage everyone to learn about all the places that they're from, and to even one day when it's safe, go back to those places and walk on the land and learn about your family and your background, because of this thing I call the hungry ghost syndrome, where when yoga teachers or people that encounter yoga, they might start because it's a physical thing and they're like, I just want to get healthy, I just want to get flexible, which is awesome. Like, that's great. But then they find deeper meaning in it. They find this spiritual connection, this sense of, I am more than just my body. I am something deeper. And that self-inquiry and that deeper sense of truth leads them, onto this amazing path of, wow, yoga is amazing. And it gave me meaning. And now I want everything to do with yoga. And now I want a Ganesh tattooed on my back. And now I want all this stuff. And I want to wear my mala beads. And, this has definitely changed in the last year with COVID. But I'm from Vancouver, where it was the birthplace of Lululemon. Like, let's get real about capitalism. Like, it was really in the heart of the neighborhood that I live in. But yeah, I think going back to the ancestral issue, so this was something that was taught to me by my friend Polka Neeks, who runs Indigenous Relations Consultation. And I highly recommend checking her out. She has amazing Indigenous allyship training that I was so fortunate to be part of. And in her training, she does an exercise where she lines up people to trace generationally what it was like for the settlers of North America and what it was like for the Indigenous people. And it was the first time that I had empathy for settlers, for white people. I love white people. I was born in England. I have an umbilical cord attached to England, and spiritually, I think we have lineage that connects to all parts of the world. So interestingly enough, many people tell me their spiritual lineage is Indian. I'm like, that's amazing. And then I'm like, my spiritual lineage is actually kind of Celtic. It's actually, I was really connected to that land that I'm born on, which is also interestingly the land of the colonizer. But regardless, going back to this, I think I had empathy for settlers because I realized they were fleeing. They were fleeing war. They were fleeing violence. They were leaving all their ancestors behind. And there was what Polkanit says, a spiritual sickness when they arrived on these shores. They had been disconnected from their ancestors and they never knew when they were going to connect back. And what I see is really beautiful is the allies that I work with. And I'm very passionate about working with people like yourself, Shannon, that are doing that hard work of inquiry and actually understanding their privilege and position. What I love is that those settlers are braiding a bridge back to their ancestors. And then from that grounded, rooted place of knowing who they are and what they went through, then I believe, and maybe this is idealistic of me, but I believe it, that they're going to connect with my culture and my religion from a place of groundedness where, the branches can overlap. The branches, the systems of religion and understanding can overlap, but we're not trying to steal it. We're not trying to claim it from that hungry ghost place of, I don't know who I am. I don't know what my life is about. I don't know what meaning is. So I'm just going to grab this other culture because it's exotic, That is so different to, wow, I know who I am. I've inquired about my own earth-based spiritual practices because every culture has embodiment practices and every culture also has medicine, has shamanism. And, maybe this is just my belief, but to me, yoga is a medicine. Yoga is my ancestral medicine. And when I connect to it, I feel all my ancestors chanting and singing with me. So when I see my Celtic friends now that I've been talking to going on this journey of reclamation, my best friend, Megan, she just bought a bodhran or a Celtic drum and she's drumming and doing her ancestral drumming. And that is, I believe, enriching all the connections in her life. So if there's one thing that you take away from this as yoga teachers who are maybe not Indian, is to reconnect to your ancestors. They are there for you. And you might have to go way back to your pagan ancestral, like ancient ancestors, because what happened in between was horrific. And none of us can deny that. The recent ancestors, there was some bad stuff that went down. I could speak on the other side of that. I don't know what it's like to live with that guilt or that shame, but I do know that we can heal and that, systems like family constellations or ancestral discovery or like going back to your family tree, your roots, like learning about the stories in your family. It's so rich. It's so rich and it enriches all of the lives around you.
Oh my gosh, I love this so much. I love that you said this can be really healing and then we come to this place. And I am I'm an optimist. And so I think let's give this a shot. And also, if we can take a look at, I think, our own culture, and then we can look at other cultures, look at our own belief system, and then same thing, other religions. I'm fascinated by other religions and other belief systems.
Yeah.
I don't feel afraid of them, and I think that's part of it. I also wanted to just highlight what you said, whose land are you on? And there's a great website that you can go to, nativeland.ca, to see whose land you are on, just in terms of,
And then going back and learning about that history of that land, were there residential schools? What do the ancestors of the land have to share with you? Connecting to nature. Here in Canada, we're so blessed to have access to nature, but really everywhere on the earth, you can put your feet on the ground and feel that energy and connect to it. So yeah, I love what you said. And I think it's really interesting too, going back to the Christianity and the interfaith movement. Some of my dearest friends are Christian, and I personally, and I talked about this for the first time on another podcast, but speaking of yoga as a direct connection to the divine, which it is for many people and has been since I was a child for me. I had a huge Kundalini awakening when I was 20 years old that was very traumatic, but an aspect of that was connected to my spiritual lineage, which actually I had a very deep connection, personal connection in this Kundalini awakening to the spirit of Christ. And that was like really confusing for me because I was raised to Sikh. I've never been drawn to the Bible. I'm still not drawn to the Bible. I'm still not drawn to the church. I still don't feel connected to the institution of religion here. But I did have deep connection and respect and felt the energy of Christ and, now of Mary Magdalene and Mother Mary. And some people would be like, wow, that's crazy. But for me, it was a very deep personal connection that resulted as a result of a Kundalini awakening. So I do think there are so many really interesting links between different religions that can be discovered when people are willing to discuss it, when we can talk about ordinary states of consciousness, or we can talk about what Kundalini awakenings are and, how many people in the world are experiencing them, sometimes through meditation, sometimes through psychedelics, sometimes through yoga, sometimes through, just life, sometimes spontaneously. Mine was quite spontaneous, but I had been doing yoga for 10 years previous to it, starting at a very young age. So yeah, I just wanted to share that because sometimes, we don't expect, like when someone looks at me as like an Indian person, they might, and even I don't even really belong in churches. Like I've gone to experiences where I've attended like a Christmas Eve thing with a friend or something. And I go to a church and I notice that I'm the only person of color there. And I'm like, oh, wow, I've never really noticed that before. And sometimes I feel welcome and sometimes I don't, and the fact is we live in a Judeo-Christian political system. A lot of our beliefs that settled this land, settled Turtle Island, North America, were grounded in this religion that has a pretty dark history with the Crusades and stuff. So all this to say, I think there's really interesting links between yoga and Christianity that if we dig deeper, we could see some deep connections about the mystical quality.
I'm popping in here for a moment, Connected Yoga Teachers, because I would like to share a bit of a conversation that I recently had with Sara Villamil. Shout out to Sara, who's a yoga teacher from Calgary, Alberta, who uses OfferingTree. I thought it would be really nice if you could hear from Sara and hear what her experience has been like using OfferingTree and working with that company. So here's a word from Sara.
I love how easy it is to get into touch with somebody from OfferingTree. I honestly feel like they're my friends. Maybe because I message them so often. I hope they feel the same way about me. I have questions for them all the time, and they get back to me so quickly and so efficiently and really answer the question at hand. And it helps me improve my offering, helps me improve my communication with my clients. And I'm always constantly able to make these little tweaks and refine my website and what I'm able to present to my clients because of how accessible OfferingTree is. Their customer service is outstanding.
I agree so much, Sara. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. It means so much to really have a company who's listening to you and who you can reach out to and they'll answer you right away. And that is definitely what I have found with OfferingTree. And I feel the same way as you. I feel like I know the names of the people who work over at OfferingTree, and they also feel like friends for sure. If you are thinking about using OfferingTree, make sure to check out Sara's website. It will give you an idea of how you can build an OfferingTree website and what it will look like. Sara's done a great job, so that's over at saravillamil.com. We'll make sure to link to Sara's website in the show notes. And if you do decide to sign up for OfferingTree, make sure to use our discount code. It's over at offeringtree.com/Shannon. We'll also put that in the show notes because we know that you're busy, you're out in the world, you're doing things. Maybe you're paddling your canoe and camping out in the wilderness or walking your dog or doing the dishes or all of those exciting things. Okay, let's get back into our conversation with Emmy. I love that you shared this story. I think it's fascinating. And this brings another question up. What do you think about when you see Christian yoga or that pulled in? What does that make you feel?
It's complicated. It really makes me feel uncomfortable in some ways because I am thinking that there has been a denial of the roots of yoga. And this is something so common in the yoga industry, in terms of like beer yoga or like weed yoga or goat yoga or, and all these things are fun. Like I almost signed up for a kitten yoga class once, but, I was like, wait, what is this? Like, this is losing, this is dilution, something is lost here because we're not recognizing, we're not acknowledging where the practice comes from. So some of the work I do with studios and teachers and, various teacher trainings is crafting a land and a lineage acknowledgement for the beginning of your class. So taking the time to really ground yourself in, this is whose land I am. This is what happened on this land. This is what I appreciate about the Indigenous people. This is where my ancestors are from. And then going into, this is where yoga is from. And I have deep gratitude and respect and honor for the people of India, especially North India, where yoga can be traced back thousands of years. Because that has been a wound of my people, is that we have offered these things freely and generously, and that's just our nature. Sikhs are going to share all their food with you. We love you. We want you to be part of our community. We are very open, and people have these massive shifts in India because of that openness. And then I think the tricky part comes in when they integrate it back into a capitalist colonial society, and there's a lack of acknowledgement of the roots. There's a profiting off of it. And when we look at the history of India, $45 trillion was stolen out of India through the British occupation of 400 years. That's a lot. I mean, the biggest diamond in the world is from India, one of them called the Koh-i-Noor, and it still exists in the Tower of London. And the day when, the Queen gives us back our giant diamond that she stole is the day that she's going to have to give everything back. And all the museums are going to have to be empty because it's, unfortunately, that history there is a history of stealing. And so how do we not steal yoga? How can we do it differently? How can we listen to people, develop relationships with Indian people who have been disconnected from their own roots because it was banned, because it was, our survival depended on pleasing the white person. And the way that colonialism sort of operated in India was a class of Indian people ruling over other Indian people, and that sort of internalized, like, why is there such a need to speak English? Why is there such a need to become an engineer, a teacher, a doctor? Why is there, such a focus on this British education system? It's because of trauma. And part of my goal in my life is to go back to my roots of sustainable agriculture, going back to the retreat center that I'm building, is to go back to the Punjab and learn traditional modes of, healing and agriculture and midwifery and all of these really rich traditions that have, unfortunately, there's been a break for us, like a sort of a cut in that lineage of the last 400 years. When the British came, there's been a attempted erasure, but it has not succeeded. Just like it has not succeeded on Turtle Island, our cultures are are revitalizing, are coming back to vibrancy. And that includes all the cultures of the world, that includes like my friend Megan, who's playing her Celtic drum. Like there's this revitalization that I see happening of consciousness. And it's not about making people wrong or right. And this is really what I've struggled with in the past year doing cultural awareness training is how do we have this conversation from our bodies and our hearts? Because it means sitting with pain. And pain is not comfortable,
We have the saying in our house, like, that darn yoga, because you sit in those places, you have more awareness of self and your relationships. Yes. And sometimes It's like, who signed up for this anyway?
Yes. And yoga is a great system to have these conversations through. I bring in metta meditation, I bring in Brahmari breath, I bring in trauma sensitive approaches, because that is the only way to have these conversations to me is from that heart-centered place, which requires us to feel, and to feel is beautiful. So yeah, I'm really excited for yoga teachers to do this real deep work off the mat, which is asking a lot. And I don't think a lot of yoga teachers are trying to disrespect culture or religion. I don't think that's where they're coming from. They're coming from a good, but what's that saying? The road to hell was paved with good intentions. Like they're coming from a place of meaning well, but also sometimes I have to say a place of ignorance of India and what partition was, what the British occupation was, what yoga was and is, and how a lot of yoga has been catered to be palatable for the upper classes and for Caucasian people. And how does that affect us as Indians in the diaspora and Indians back home in the motherland? That's a question I'd like yoga teachers to research.
This is really fascinating. I was just thinking, like, if part of every 200-hour yoga teacher training, there was a little quiz, like, a little like multiple choice history of yoga, history of where yoga came from, I think I would fail it, honestly.
I think there's a huge lack of cultural awareness in YTTs, and most people have profited through the yoga industry through YTTs.
Right.
And there's a huge issue here that I have noticed, going in to do my workshops and my trainings now, there's only a few schools that are jumping on board. And unfortunately, like I said, with the spiritual bypassing, it can be slow to get that work in, but it is happening. I will say that there has been a little bit of forward momentum with, the Yoga is Dead podcast and people actually asking themselves about race and power and privilege, which again is the labor of the Black Lives Matter movement. So when I tried to have these conversations about cultural awareness and religion and all these things, and, for me, it's really coming from what would my grandmother want me to say? Because she was my first teacher and the dearest person in my family who taught me all my ancestral medicine. And she was way before her time, I practiced yoga with my grandmother and my mother. So what would she want me to say? And, I think that, yes, we have to come from love and we have to come from the sense of oneness, but we also have to practice the ethics, the yamas and the niyamas. We have to go back to how do we treat people? Because like basic kindergarten stuff has not happened, and there's been a lack of diversity in yoga. And I think all of us are aware of that now. And then we have to ask ourselves, what do we do about it? What's the action step? Is it enough to just be like, oh yeah, I'm privileged. And then just like not do anything? That's not enough. Like it has to be meaningful, and it has to be all of us stepping up to the plate.
This is fascinating. I'm thinking now, because you said action steps, there has to be that action. Do you have anything that you feel really can help yoga teachers who are currently sharing yoga? And like you said, not meaning, like when I came out of my 200-hour, I certainly didn't think, oh yeah, I'm just going to treat yoga badly, but there are many ways that I did without knowing. And in treating yoga badly, also treating the people who created and the cultures who created yoga. So I'm wondering, what kind of action steps do you see making a difference right now?
Yeah, it's a big question. And for me, it's about developing, meaningful relationships with Indian people and like going to India and learning about the history there. I really hesitate to say what allies should do because I feel like that's what the ally needs to discover in the process. And I feel like that's a lot of emotional labor for me to say, oh, you should do this to make it better. Like, no, like that's for the yoga teachers who are not Indian to discover about themselves. And I want to hold them accountable to that in the sense of there's so many things you can do. You can hire people like me that are doing cultural awareness consultation and trainings, and you can pay us for that labor. And so that, we can work together in a very transformative relationship. And this is what I find really beautiful is going back to my Indigenous friends. One thing that Polkaneeks shared with me, and I will give you her website and stuff later if anyone wants to check out her work, Indigenous Relations Consultation. She said to me, that it wasn't that long ago that all of us could sit in the same room and not want to kill each other or commit violence to each other. Now we're actually having peaceful conversations, and that is a win. Just the fact that you and I can sit together when maybe our ancestors did some bad things to each other, that in itself is healing and transformative. And from that place of dialogue, of discourse, of understanding, of love, of meditating together, this is when I come back to the gratitude to my ancestors, because yoga is that. It is people of all backgrounds and available to everybody who has a body, or even, if you can breathe and be aware of it, you're doing yoga, and let's start with the place of gentle self-inquiry and self-compassion too, because one thing I've seen, and again, maybe I differ from a lot of cultural consultants in this way because I don't want to come from anger, but I see a lot of people really struggling with guilt and shame. And, my conditioning is to take care of other people's emotions and put their emotions first and put my needs second. And so for me to just be able to share honestly with you and to talk is very healing, because it's held in a space of respect and honor. And that, I think, is an energetic quality that all of us can bring to these conversations. We can come to it from a place of gentle, quiet listening and understanding, and see that as humans, we've all been wounded by colonialism. It's not just those of us that are living with that lived experience of genocide, but all of us have been wounded. And that means we all have to kind of hold hands and slowly step up and say, like, I care about you and I love you and I want to learn about your culture too. And that's where things like food come in really handy, like come and eat some Indian food and enjoy it. And then I'll eat some, meat and potatoes and we can share, because food is universal. And going back to my retreat space and sustainable agriculture, this really feels like, for me, because I can't tell allies what to do, for me, what I can do is create a place of gathering, a place of like beauty, of flowers, of, I'm creating this space called Everglow, and it's coming from the place of, I don't want to impose my wishes on the land. I want to listen to the land first. So I've spent this year, and I'll continue. We just got the land in February, I'll continue this whole year of listening to the more than human world, and informed by people like Robin Wall Kimmerer, who wrote Braiding Sweetgrass. Braiding Sweetgrass is a great book to read, by the way, for yoga teachers, because it does have a lot of different economic approaches that you can apply to yoga. So, a lot of the issues, and this is what I wanted to say earlier, a lot of the issues around commodification, extractivism, come from this very small, elite, wealthy, white, people that own Lululemon, people like Goop, people like, I don't want to name names, but there are a very small elite of people that are really benefiting massively from exoticism and capitalism. And those are the people that I really think need to have a hard talking to. But those of us on the ground that are really leading from our hearts and trying our best and doing this work of unlearning and learning about our land and decolonization and what does that look like, and making these important relationships, those people are, I think, part of the change of a new earth, where we're creating a new way of looking at the world. I feel like I rambled a lot there, but I hope something was good.
I love it. And I love that it's also, we're not looking to our South Asian yoga teachers to do the work because that would just be continuing the harm. I want to highlight that. I'd love to know from those who are here live or who are listening to the replay, what action steps are you taking? What things are you doing? I know that I really learn from connecting with people and hearing stories, learning about history through different people as well and different cultures. History sounds very different depending on who's telling the story. This is great. This book, Braiding Sweetgrass, has been in my it's been in my Audible, ready to go. Someone told me to read it. So
It's an amazing book. And, in terms of action steps, if there's one thing that I would say all non-Indian teachers should do, it's go research your own ancestors, go learn about your own spiritual practices, your embodiment practices, and your earth-based practices. When we look at archaeological evidence of yoga, it was a lot about sun, connection to the sun, connection to the goddess, and all cultures have this. So go back and reclaim your own ancestral roots. And then with that groundedness, share your yoga.
that's really fascinating. And to kind of summarize here, I'm also wondering, like, if someone came up to you on the street and they're like, I need a yes or no answer, is yoga religion? Which I realize that this is very nuanced and you've described in depth this whole time, but how would you answer them really simply?
Oh, so hard to answer simply. Is yoga religion? No, but it is influenced and influences all of the major religions of India.
Okay.
And it is a very advanced, mind, body, spirit practice that's open to everyone.
So does it then have the ability to also influence Western religions, do you think?
Such a good question. Such a good question. Well, I think we have to ask ourselves, what is religion? And, when I say, that yoga is open to everyone, traditionally yoga was passed down from teacher to student directly through this line, right? And that's how a lot of teachings in India were done, was through lifetime study with a teacher. And this has caused, a lot of change because now the teacher is within and the teacher is within our own hearts. And we can take external sources and say, yes, this feels true to me, but I really believe that our inner authority is where we have to come from first. We do the work and we engage with the world, but our connection to spirit is within and in everything. So, going back to your question, like, is it going to affect Western religion? I kind of think religion is over. Like this, to be totally honest, I don't think religion is going to make it into the new earth because nature, for many people in British Columbia, nature is our spiritual connection. The earth is what we need to focus on now because we have screwed up as humanity. We have not practiced the heart of the religions, which is about treat thy neighbor well or whatever, and don't kill people, like basic kindergarten kindness. Like, let's go back to that. I would rather, and maybe, some people might accuse me of this as a cop-out, but I would rather leave religion aside and say, what is love? Like, what is love inside of us? What does love look like? What is love in action? What is yoga in action? How does yoga and love connect? How does self-inquiry lead to better relationships? Like, let's think about this from a tangible perspective instead of getting caught up in that dogma and that rigid institution, just like all institutions right now, I'm sure we can see, are crumbling because they're no longer relevant. So some people might say, I find community in religion, or I find this in religion. I'm like, sure, that's awesome. If that's your path, you do you. And, in Sikhism, there's a saying, if you're a Hindu, be a good Hindu. If you're a Muslim, be a good Muslim. If you're a Christian, be a good Christian. And if you're a yogi, be a good yogi. It's not a religion. No, it's about how does your everyday life reflect spirit and source? That's what I would say.
This is powerful. Thank you for this. And you're not alone in thinking this. It's so timely. I was listening to the news And there was a study done saying that people are no longer connecting as much to the word religion. Instead, they're saying, I'm looking for a spiritual practice. And so you didn't make this. This is actually something that is happening in the world, and you're hearing it and you're feeling it.
Yeah. And I think that, like I said earlier, religion came from a fear-based control place. And we're transcending that now. We're coming to a place of, wow, we can have peaceful societies that stem from our inherent goodness and our love and our compassion. And that's what mindfulness and yoga has done for the world. It has made compassion mainstream, which is unbelievable. I mean, think about that gift from my ancestors. It has transformed millions of people's lives. And I think the least you can do if you've been transformed by it is to give something back to India, to be reciprocal, to think about what can I give? How can I return this favor? And how can I go back to my ancestral practices and share honestly and respectfully and with love? That's all we can ask at the end of the day.
That's amazing. I want to come back to something that you said. Yoga can help you in your faith practice. I think this is where we see a lot of people saying, yoga does really connect to my faith practice, whatever that might be. And you have found that, and it's fascinating to me to hear your story about growing up and in the Sikh temple doing yoga. It was definitely in your faith practice as you grew up.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, I think that things like meditation and prayer and song and chanting, these are, again, all universal human qualities. These are ways that we revere and honor the spirit that is all. And Bhakti yoga, is one of those places that gets a little people are like, oh wait, is Bhakti yoga religion or whatever? And I'm like, no, maybe Bhakti yoga is about devotion. And, let's take it back to the focus of religion or faith, which to me is about, again, living from that place of spirit and source and remembering and being kind to each other. Bhakti yoga is really beautiful because it's using sound as a way to affect our physiology. And I really believe, and this is just, again, my belief, but I really believe that Sanskrit and Gurmukhi, the language that I come from, the heightened form of Punjabi, that they have embedded sound healing in them. There's a technology in them that has a really profound impact on our physiology. And this hasn't been studied yet. This is kind of I think 20 years down the line, we're going to start seeing proof of sound healing. But in terms of chanting, that's one of the things people feel uncomfortable about. And I'm like, well, learn about what the chant means, learn about the Sanskrit pronunciation, learn where it's coming from, and then do it if you want to, and don't do it if you don't want to. You can listen, you can enjoy, just like I listen to music from all the places in the world, from Morocco, from here. I can appreciate it and honor it. And I can also say, if I don't feel comfortable singing it, or if I haven't been given permission to sing it. For example, a lot of safeguarding is done around Indigenous songs to respect the sacredness of the song. And that's what I think we need to approach yoga with, is from a spirit of sacredness. Yeah, I don't know if that's a word, but sanctity, from a place of sanctity.
Mm-hmm. Oh, this is amazing. My first YTT teacher is a Sikh, Kundalini, in Kundalini yoga, and also a naturopath, and really talked to us about sound healing and the sounds and different connections. So I feel like the two of you would have a lot to share.
Yeah. And Kundalini yoga, is the music of it is beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you so much for this. If people want to reach out and learn more from you, I'm going to put your website here. Yeah. Also tell us, what do you have going on now? How can we connect with you? How can we work with you further?
Yeah, so I work with yoga teachers one-to-one in mentorship and consultation capacities. I also do workshops for YTTs and studios, and do a lot of corporate wellness diversity consultation as well. So I'm totally open for any of those avenues of connection. And also I'm in this big transition in my life of building this retreat space in British Columbia. So yeah, I would say my life is in transition right now into creating this dream of mine, which will be a long-term dream. But yeah, that's where I'm at, and you can find me on my website. And I'm hoping one day to build a online course around, cultural awareness, but it's still in the works. So.
That's amazing. If any of our connected yoga teachers have questions, you can still pop them in the comments here and we'll come back to them. And I also just want to thank everyone who's been here listening live or for the replay. This is part of the work. And sometimes it's uncomfortable to think, oh gosh, did I say that thing? Did I do that thing? And I'm just really thankful for your time here today, Emmy, you as well as our listeners. It means a lot.
Oh, you're so welcome. And, we all on this journey of creating a better world, we're all going to make mistakes, and that gentleness and that openness to talk about it. If anybody wants to reach out to me in an email or anything, I'm always happy to hear from you. So thanks so much, Shannon.
I also want to say, just as a PS, connected yoga teachers, stay tuned, because Emmy brought up some really great things around land acknowledgement. And speaking of mistakes, I made a huge one. Shout out to Amber, who messaged me way back and was like, what about land acknowledgements? And I didn't listen as well as I could have. We've been in conversation again. I sent an apology. We're going to talk about it on the podcast. And just many of these topics are coming up on the podcast. We are learning here together. And so I'm excited for that. I just want to give a shout out to one listener who's saying thank you, and someone else who's saying thank you for your time and service.
You're so welcome. That's awesome. Yeah, land and lineage acknowledgements are a very tangible and often tricky thing to learn. And I'm so glad that you're taking that journey, Shannon, and you're really setting a positive example for other allies and other advocates.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Emmy, for all of your wisdom in today's episode and also in last week's episode with you and Jessica. I just cannot thank you enough for all that you brought to both of these episodes. And I'm excited for our listeners to follow you, to reach out to you if they'd like to learn more and to connect with you. I wanted to share Connected Yoga Teachers, one of my biggest takeaways and how I've built this into my own personal life lately. I love how Emmy talked about how we can start to dig into our own culture, and how she talked about this hungry ghost syndrome when we start to steal from other cultures because we have lost that connection to our culture. And I've really been thinking about this. I know I've talked about it on the podcast. I've been reading a lot of books, and what's interesting is that after this podcast episode and some other ones that we've done, I really notice where religion, belief systems are coming in, especially when I'm reading historical fiction books, which I absolutely love reading. And I've been really focused on reading books from Ireland, Scotland, a little bit from England. I haven't gotten too much into the German side of things. So those are the 4 places my ancestors are from. And the one thing that really keeps coming up is how people for generations were colonized or divided or told what they could or could not do, or really put through so much in life in the name of religion. And it's fascinating to me to think that most of these belief systems or religions, I'm saying religion because that's the word that I've grown up with, most of the ones that I grew up knowing about, that's not in the belief system, the values to cause harm to people. I also feel very connected with this, being a Canadian living in North America and just looking at all that has happened with the Indigenous people who were here first on our land. And so I also am looking at different books, and I'm just really appreciating the time where I get to read a book and hear someone's point of view or learn something new about history. So if you have suggestions for books that you are reading and it makes you think about, all of the things that we talked about today, or maybe some expanded views on that, I would love your book suggestions. Make sure to reach out to me and tell me. I've been enjoying listening to Audible books while I'm out gardening or doing laundry or whatever, and I would love to know what you're listening to. Thank you also for being here and listening to the podcast. It means a lot. It means a lot to me that you are choosing with your listening time, with your listening ears, this time right here. And I cannot express how grateful I am to think that you are tuning into this when I know there are so many other parts of yoga, like how to, sequence your class or teach in an effective way, or how to get more students showing up to your class. And so I have some really good news along that as well. We're digging in today, and I'm super grateful that you are here for these types of conversations. And we are going to move into some episodes that are more around teaching skills and building your business. And so, thanks for being here for all of it. Make sure to share conversations like this one with yoga teachers and yoga practitioners, especially when the conversation of religion comes up. It means so much when you share the podcast. I really notice when you share it on social media or also in emails. Thank you so much to those of you who do that. Or for those who are talking about it to other yoga teachers in yoga teacher training or out in the world. All of our show notes for today's episode can be found over at theconnectedyogateacher.com/278, or go to our website and use the search button. I do this all the time when I'm thinking, do we have a podcast on that? Then you can type in religion, and this episode will come up, and I think there's one other one that should pop up with that search. I also want to say a huge thank you to Angela from Meet Me on My Mat from the US. Angela wrote a review that says, "So grateful for this connection, the way you engage in real conversation, listening to guests and listeners, as well as sharing your own experience, and every opportunity you present for learning and reflection. I look forward to every episode and always have a practical takeaway to use in my personal practice, life, and in practice with others. Thank you for paying attention, asking the tough questions, and remaining authentic, vulnerable, teachable. What a great role model and resource." Oh my gosh, Angela, this makes me feel like all the warm, fuzzy feelings, like a nice hug. So thank you so much for taking the time to leave this review. Thank you also for being part of things also inside of Pelvic Health Professionals. It's been fun to hang out and get to see you face to face, even if it's over Zoom, and to get to know more about your yoga business and what you're building there. And speaking of Pelvic Health Professionals, if you would like to come and hang out together and learn, we have 2 live calls a month. So we do one live call that is focused on growing our business and connecting with each other inside of Pelvic Health Professionals. And then we also invite guest experts in to answer your questions so that you can get the most up-to-date information. I'm really excited because in July, we're going to have Leslie Howard come in and talk about the energetics of the pelvis. And then in August, we're going to talk about desire and libido with Dr. Rose. And then in September, Jill is going to come in and talk to us about endometriosis and pelvic health. And we have another call later in the year about endometriosis as well. There's been some really big changes happening in the world with regards to endo. So stay tuned for all of this, and make sure if you're wanting to attend calls like this and to learn how to help your yoga students who have a pelvis, that's really who Pelvic Health Professionals is for. Make sure you go on over to pelvichealthprofessionals.com. And you can join, you could decide, okay, I just want to join for that one call, or you can join for all of our previous calls. It's all in our library. Or you can hang out there each and every month and learn along with us and use the membership to its fullest and ask all of the questions that you can. We're there for you. That's where I love to hang out, quote unquote, in person, but online so that we can meet up on Zoom. Thank you so much to our entire team for working on today's episode. Suzanne, Crunch, and Sinead. These are amazing humans doing amazing work out in this world. And thank you, dear listener. Like I said, I am just so grateful that you choose to spend your time here listening to today's episode with Emmy and hanging out and thinking about all of these very nuanced topics that have to do with yoga and the culture and religion. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here for this. And I'm also curious now, what will you be doing this week to stay connected to yourself, your yoga practice, and to your community so that you can share the yoga that lights you up?